Hi, my name's Charity. I'm from Accessible Nutrition and I'm one of the co-authors of a cookbook called Easy Healthy Tasty, which has been written to help you in the kitchen. Here in Australia and in New Zealand, today is ANZAC Day, a day where we remember all the Defence Force personnel, the soldiers, doctors, nurses, everyone who has helped to give us the freedom that we enjoy here in our countries, both now and also in the past. And one of the ways that we remember them is by making a thing called ANZAC Biscuits. So I'd love for you to join me today as we do that together. To make ANZAC Biscuits, we're going to need a saucepan and we're also going to need a bowl. But before we get to the bowl, we need to get some things on the stove to melt. We're going to need 125 grams of butter and 2 and a bit, so fairly generous, 2 and a bit tablespoons of golden syrup. Now, when you buy butter in the supermarket, you might notice that depending on the size of the block, will depend on the numbers, but there's often markings that give you a bit of a guide as to how much butter you're cutting off. So this one has 100 marks. Some of them have 50 gram marks. It depends what you get. But these are really handy because in today's recipe, we don't need to get out the scales. We don't need to be particularly precise with the amounts that we're using. So we can use these as a guide. And that's what we've tried to do with all of the recipes that we make with Easy Healthy Tasty, is make them so that near enough is good enough. So we're going to cut off 125 grams of this butter. So I probably need to cut it 100, that would be 150. So around here is going to be about 125 grams. And so now that I've marked that spot, when I open up my butter, I can see the indent that I made and I can use that as a guide to cut off the amount that I need. So around about here. Now this butter is straight out of the fridge, so it's fairly firm, but that's okay because we're going to melt it anyway. That goes in the saucepan, and now we're going to add our golden syrup. It might look like I'm going to overfill, especially this first tablespoon of golden syrup, but there's a reason for that. As I pour it, you can see it's fairly thick, and so unless I'm going to stand here watching it drip off for quite a while, when I go to put the second tablespoon in, there's still going to be some left over from that first tablespoon. So I've estimatedly made up for that by overfilling the first one a bit. And same with the second, I'll overfill that a little bit too. And maybe just a tiny little extra squeeze too. So before we started today, I washed my hands so I know they're clean. And that means I'm just going to use my finger to scrape out the bit that's left sitting in the spoon, so we get all of that golden syrup. And now I'm just going to take this over to the stove to melt it. So we'll turn that on. This is just on the small burner on our stove. Yes, that is lit. And I'll just put it down sort of medium-ish. We don't want to make a caramel or anything with this. We're just trying to melt the butter. Now I'm going to wash my hands because they've got golden syrup on them. Okay, so now we can get on with our dry ingredients. So to this bowl, we're going to need a 1 cup measure, and we're going to add 1 cup of flour. Whoopsie daisies. Well, we might not need all of that. Let's take some of that off. Okay, we don't have to be particularly accurate, but we need to be a little bit more accurate than that. Now we're going to add 1 cup of sugar. There's a little lump that went in there, but we will get rid of that in a little while. Close enough. We're going to add 1 cup of rolled oats. And we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of desiccated coconut. Now, if you don't really like coconut, you can always just add an extra 1 cup of rolled oats. Okay, that will do. Now I can hear over on the stove that I need to give this butter and golden syrup a swirl. So we're just going to give it a swirl to stop it from bubbling, because we don't want it to bubble up and cook, we just want it to melt. So you can see there's still a little bit of butter in there that hasn't melted, but I think it will be all melted in just a second. All right, we're going to bring this over to the bench and I'll show you the next part. Okay, we're just going to give these dry ingredients a quick mix together, and I'm going to look out for those lumps of sugar that I saw when I was putting it in the cup. I'm just going to try and break those apart, because we don't want biscuits with huge lumps of sugar in them. So we're just stirring this to combine them, to try and mix them together fairly evenly. Okay. Now, to our butter and golden syrup mix, we're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. I quite like the boxes because you can use the edge of this opening here as a bit of a lip, so that you make sure you get the amount that you want. I'm just going to put that in any little cup or anything like that that you happen to have. And now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of hot water to this, and then we're going to mix it in with the butter and the golden syrup. So to this we're going to add 2 tablespoons, that was 1 and a bit there, so I might do a bit less than 1 here, of hot water. And there's no need to dirty an extra spoon, just use your mixing spoons to mix that together. Now this is where it gets really fun, and if you've got kids, these biscuits are great to make with them, because this is when the magic starts to happen. So give this just a second, and you can see that it starts to bubble. Now my kids really enjoyed watching this, so if you've got children around, it's a great way to entertain them. I mean, these are the kind of biscuits that are great to get children involved in making anyway. So now all we're going to do is mix this in with our dry ingredients. I should mention, although this is a great fun recipe to get the kids involved, because this is hot, make sure they do have adult supervision, but the mixture in the bowl cools down very quickly. So now we're just mixing together the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients. Interesting family history. One of my great, I think there's only 2 greats, maybe there's 3, uncles, was a soldier in World War I, and he landed at Gallipoli 105 years ago today. Unfortunately, we don't know what happened to him, and we'll never know for sure. But the official record says that he's presumed to have died 105 years ago today. So Anzac Day is particularly special for me, and I'm very thankful for his sacrifice. So these are now mixed all together, and all we need to do is make our biscuits. So we'll get rid of the saucepan, and I'll bring a tray. Now I've preheated my oven to 150 degrees Celsius because that's the temperature we're going to cook them at. And because I'm just making these for my family and I don't mind getting my hands messy and I know my hands are clean, I'm not going to bother putting on gloves. But if you're making these for somebody else, or if you don't really like getting your hands messy, feel free to put on gloves for this next bit because it does involve getting mixture all over your hands. But all we're going to do is grab a handful of mixture. We're going to squeeze it into a ball using our hands. And then we're going to flatten it out on our hands and put it down on the tray. One done. You can make these as big or as small as you like. I probably wouldn't make them too much bigger than that myself, but hey, do what you like. And I do need to thank my aunt for providing us with this recipe that we're using today. It's her modified version of the CWA recipe. So a ball, flatten it out in your hand. I just use the heel of my hand to help flatten it out, and then on the tray. Handful, squeeze into a ball, flatten it out, and onto the tray. These will spread a little bit in the oven, but in my experience, they don't spread all that much if you've already flattened it out on your hand. And even this morning when I baked a batch and put them a little bit too close together, so they ended up touching by the time they were finished cooking, they still came apart very easily. They weren't completely joined together or anything like that. So I'll just put one more on this tray. And obviously we've still got about half of the mixture left. So really we'll need to do another tray of these. But for the purposes of the video, we can put these in the oven as soon as I've washed my hands. So in they go. Okay, so we've put those in a 150 degrees Celsius oven and we're going to cook them for 10 minutes. After that, we're going to check them because they might have puffed up. And if they have, grab yourself a spatula to deflate them. So press them down and cook them for another 10 minutes. And what you'll find is that you'll end up with these deliciously golden brown ANZAC biscuits.